The story you know about cocaine is a lie. It's a story of cartels, crime, and addiction. A story of back alleys and broken lives. But this story, the one that dominates our headlines and our fears, is a modern invention designed to cover up a truth that's thousands of years old. Before it was a symbol of vice, before it was a powder, before it ever had a price per gram, it was a plant, a sacred leaf, revered by ancient civilizations as a tool for survival and a bridge to the divine. To understand how a plant once considered a gift from the gods became one of the world's most dangerous substances, we need to peel back the layers of deception. We have to travel from ancient Peruvian temples to Victorian-era pharmacies, and from the halls of science to the backrooms of law. This is the story of how history was rewritten. This is the 8,000-year-old lie you believe about cocaine. Imagine a world without fatigue, a world where hunger and thirst are distant thoughts, where the crushing weight of physical exhaustion just vanishes. For the ancient peoples of the Andes, this wasn't a fantasy. It was a daily reality, made possible by a single sacred plant. The history you've been told starts here, with a huge misunderstanding. The lie begins by confusing this ancient tradition with the modern drug it spawned. We're going to unravel that lie, piece by piece. The 8,000-year-old truth of the sacred leaf. To find the real story, we have to go way back. Not to the 1980s, but to the dawn of agriculture in South America. Archaeological evidence suggests that people in Peru's Nanchoc Valley were chewing coca leaves as far back as 8,000 years ago. This makes the coca plant one of the oldest cultivated crops in the Americas. This wasn't some hidden vice. It was a part of daily life, woven into the fabric of society. Fast forward to about 3,000 years ago, and the evidence is undeniable. Mummies unearthed in northern Chile have tested positive for the alkaloids found in coca, a silent testament to its long-standing use. As great civilizations rose, so did their reverence for the plant. The Moche, Tiwanaku, and Wari cultures all left behind a rich artistic record. Their pottery is filled with figures whose bulging cheeks are an unmistakable sign of chewing coca leaves. They weren't hiding it, they were celebrating it. But it was under the powerful Inca Empire that the coca leaf reached its cultural and spiritual peak. The Incas called it the divine plant, and for them, it was much more than a simple stimulant. It was a tool, a medicine, and a sacrament. Take the Chasquis, the elite runners of the Inca Empire. These messengers were the lifeblood of a kingdom connected by a road network stretching some 40,000 kilometers, about 25,000 miles. Their ability to run for days across some of the most brutal terrain on Earth seems superhuman. It was made possible by a small pouch of coca leaves. By slowly chewing the leaves, they could ward off fatigue, hunger, and thirst, pushing their bodies to the absolute limit. This wasn't about getting high. It was about survival and serving the empire. The coca leaf was also the Incas' best medicine against a silent enemy, soroche or altitude sickness. Much of the Inca homeland sits above 3,500 meters, where the thin air can cause severe headaches, nausea, and exhaustion. The alkaloids in the coca leaf help dilate blood vessels and improve the body's oxygen absorption. It was a natural remedy that made life possible in the clouds. This ancient wisdom is still practiced today, as travelers in the Andes are often offered coca tea to acclimate. Beyond its practical uses, coca was profoundly spiritual. It was considered a gift from the sun god, Inti. During religious ceremonies, coca leaves were burned as sacred offerings, their smoke carrying prayers to the heavens. Rulers were buried with offerings of the finest coca leaves to ensure their connection to the divine in the afterlife. The plant was so sacred that its cultivation became a state monopoly, with its use restricted to the nobility, the army, and those who served the empire with distinction. For thousands of years, this was the story of coca. It was a source of energy, a form of medicine, and a sacred link to the spiritual world. The people of the Andes chewed the whole leaf, a practice as natural to their lives as brewing tea or coffee is to ours. They were consuming a complex plant, rich in vitamins, minerals, and a mix of over a dozen different alkaloids, of which the cocaine alkaloid is just one small part. The effect was a mild, steady stimulation, more like a strong cup of coffee than the jarring rush of the modern drug. This is the 8,000-year-old truth, a story of culture, survival, and spirituality. And it's the foundation upon which the great lie was built. The deception begins when this ancient use of a sacred plant gets confused with something else entirely, when the leaf is turned into a powder and its history is erased. The curious case of the cocaine mummies. For a long time, the history seemed pretty simple, right? The coca plant was from the Americas, so cocaine was unknown to the Old World until after Columbus. It was a clean timeline. But in 1992, that timeline was shattered. The disruption came from Dr. Svetlana Balabanova, a German forensic toxicologist who specialized in detecting drugs and poisons for law enforcement. The Egyptian Museum in Munich asked her to run tests on some of their mummies, hoping to learn more about their lives. One of those mummies was Hennet Tawi, a priestess who lived around 1000 BC. Dr. Balabanova took samples and ran them through two state-of-the-art systems, radioimmunoassay and gas chromatography/mass spectrometry, GC/MS, the global standard for forensic drug testing. The results that came back were, in a word, impossible. Hennet Tawi tested positive for cocaine, nicotine, and hashish. Balabanova's first reaction was disbelief. It had to be a mistake. Contamination. She cleaned her lab and ran the tests again. Same result. She sent new samples to 3 other independent labs. They all confirmed her findings. It wasn't just Hennet Tawi. In total, 9 Egyptian mummies, dating from 1070 BC to 395 AD, all tested positive for these substances. The drugs weren't just on the surface. They were locked deep inside the hair and bone, proof they had been consumed during life. When Balabanova published her findings, the scientific community didn't react with curiosity. They reacted with hostility. The implications were just too radical. For cocaine and nicotine to be in Egyptian mummies thousands of years before Columbus suggested ancient Egyptians might have sailed to the Americas. Mainstream Egyptologists dismissed the findings as contamination. Maybe a Victorian-era excavator who enjoyed snuff or coca-laced wines had contaminated them. But this theory struggled to explain how contaminants could get deep into bone tissue or bind within a hair shaft, which usually happens through consumption. For years, the cocaine mummies remained a fringe fascination, a piece of forbidden history, ignored by mainstream academics. But as time went on, a closer look at the evidence started to reveal some problems. The biggest issue was concentration. The levels of cocaine found were incredibly low. In fact, by modern forensic standards, most of the mummies wouldn't have even tested positive for cocaine use. When compared to pre-Columbian Peruvian mummies, where coca chewing was a daily practice. The Peruvian mummies showed much higher concentrations. If Egyptians had been using coca regularly, the levels should have been similar. They weren't. This points back to the most likely, if less exciting, explanation: modern contamination. While Dr. Balabanova's lab was clean, the mummies themselves had a long, poorly documented history. They had been handled, transported, and stored by countless people for over a century, offering a huge window for low-level contamination to occur. And what about the nicotine? It might have been introduced after death, possibly as an ingredient in embalming fluids, or even as an insecticide used by collectors, since tobacco extract has a long history as a pesticide. The final nail in the coffin for the grand theory of ancient transatlantic trade is the lack of replication. While Balabanova and a few others reported positive results in the 90s, access to these specific mummies for independent retesting hasn't been granted. Science demands replication, and in this case, the sensational findings have remained isolated and unverified. The cocaine mummy controversy ended up being a historical distraction. It created a myth of ancient Egyptian drug use built on flimsy evidence, sending researchers on a wild goose chase across the Atlantic. Meanwhile, the real story, one with far greater consequences, was about to unfold in 19th century Europe. The miracle drug and the great medical deception. The transformation of the coca leaf into cocaine powder didn't happen in an ancient temple. It happened in a German university. In 1859, a graduate student named Albert Niemann first isolated the coca plant's main active alkaloid. He named the white, crystalline powder cocaine. For the first time, the plant's power was separated from the plant itself. This single act would redefine medicine before plunging millions into addiction. For 2 decades, the discovery was mostly an academic curiosity. That all changed in the 1880s, thanks in large part to a young, ambitious neurologist in Vienna, Sigmund Freud. In 1884, Freud published a glowing paper titled Über Coca, on coca. Having experimented on himself, he called it a magical substance. He promoted it as a cure for depression, fatigue, and most famously, as a treatment for morphine addiction. He prescribed it to his friends, his colleagues, and even his fiancée, believing it was a perfectly safe, non-addictive tonic. Freud's paper was a sensation, but he'd missed the drug's single most important medical use. In a quick note, he mentioned that it seemed to numb his tongue. His colleague, an ophthalmologist named Carl Kohler, seized on this observation. At the time, eye surgery was a terrifying ordeal performed on fully conscious patients. Kohler was looking for a way to numb the eyeball. In September 1884, Kohler demonstrated his discovery at a medical conference. He applied a cocaine solution to a patient's eye and then, to the astonishment of the doctors, poked the eye surface without the patient feeling a thing. It was a revolution. Within months, cocaine was being hailed as a miracle anesthetic, its use spreading to dentistry, throat surgery, and countless other procedures. This kicked off a period of wild medical euphoria. Cocaine wasn't just a tool, it was seen as a cure-all. It became the star ingredient in all sorts of over-the-counter products. There was Vin Mariani, a popular Bordeaux wine infused with coca leaves, endorsed by popes, kings, and even Thomas Edison. There were cocaine-laced toothache drops, nerve tonics, and chocolate bars. And most famously, a pharmacist named John Pemberton created a beverage that originally contained both coca and wine. When his state enacted prohibition, He replaced the wine with sugar syrup, creating a new drink he called Coca-Cola. Until 1903, the world's most popular soft drink contained a dose of cocaine. Throughout this time, one narrative was pushed relentlessly by pharmaceutical companies and the medical establishment. Cocaine was safe and non-addictive. This was the central, catastrophic lie of the era. The warning signs were there from the start. As early as 1885, reports of poisonings began to appear in medical journals, but they were mostly ignored. Even pioneers like William Halsted, one of America's most brilliant surgeons, became hopelessly addicted. Freud's own friend, Ernst von Fleischl-Marxow, to whom he had prescribed cocaine, descended into a nightmare of paranoid hallucinations of white snakes creeping over his skin before he died. The tragedy shook Freud, who later distanced himself from the drug he had championed. By the turn of the 20th century, the lie was falling apart. In the United States alone, an estimated 200,000 people were addicted to cocaine by 1902. The wonder drug was creating a public health crisis. The market was completely unregulated. You could buy products containing both cocaine and toxic additives, with instructions to take them every few hours, a recipe for addiction. As the medical community abandoned cocaine for safer synthetic anesthetics like Novocaine, the public mood curdled from celebration to fear. This fear was then weaponized. The response wasn't treatment, but criminalization. In 1914, the U.S. Congress passed the Harrison Narcotics Tax Act. While presented as a tax law, it was enforced as a prohibition law, fueled by racially charged newspaper headlines about cocaine-crazed criminals. The wonder drug of the 1880s was now a public menace. The era of medical deception was over. The era of criminalization had begun. The Great Conflation, the final layer of the lie. We've traveled from the Andes to German labs and through reckless Victorian pharmacies. Now we arrive at the heart of the 8,000-year-old lie. The ultimate deception isn't the cocaine mummies or the promise of a medical miracle. It's the deliberate confusion of the coca leaf with cocaine powder. It's the conflation of an ancient plant with its modern chemical extract. This distinction isn't a small detail, it's everything. When an Andean Chazka chewed coca leaves, he was engaging with a whole plant, a complex substance with a cocktail of compounds. The leaves have nutrients, vitamins, and minerals. They contain about 14 major alkaloids, and the cocaine alkaloid itself makes up less than 1% of the leaf. And how they consumed it is a world away from the modern drug. Chewing the leaf allows for the slow, gradual absorption of these alkaloids. The effect is mild and sustained, more like caffeine than an intense, euphoric rush. It's a stimulant, yes, but one delivered in nature's holistic package. Now consider cocaine hydrochloride, the white powder. This isn't a plant, it's a chemical. It's the end product of a process that uses gasoline, sulfuric acid, and other chemicals to isolate and concentrate a single alkaloid. The result is a substance hundreds of times more potent than the leaf it came from. When this chemical is snorted or injected, it floods the brain's reward pathways, creating the powerful, addictive high that the coca leaf itself does not produce. Equating chewing a coca leaf with snorting a line of cocaine is like equating eating an apple with injecting a syringe of pure, refined fructose. Same source, but the product, method, and effect are worlds apart. So why does this lie persist? Because it serves a purpose. By blurring the line between the plant and the powder, The architects of drug prohibition were able to vilify an 8,000-year-old cultural tradition. It allowed them to project the real dangers of a modern chemical onto a traditional plant and the indigenous cultures who revered it. It painted an Andean farmer tending his ancestral crops with the same brush as a cartel trafficker. This confusion was written into global law. The 1961 UN Single Convention on Narcotic Drugs listed the coca leaf in the same category as cocaine, condemning the traditional practice of coca chewing and calling for its elimination. An ancient tradition was effectively declared illegal by a world that refused to understand it. This great conflation is the final, insidious layer of the deception. It flattens a complex history into a simple, scary story. It erases the distinction between culture and crime, plant and poison. It allows the narrative to begin not with reverence in the Andes, but with addiction and danger. It's a lie that has fueled a global war on drugs, a war fought against a chemical, but one whose casualties have often been the people and cultures connected to the sacred plant from which it came. The story of cocaine is a powerful example of how history can be twisted, misunderstood, and used as a weapon. We believe understanding these complex truths is more important now than ever. If you find this kind of deep historical analysis valuable and want to help us uncover more stories you've never been told, please consider subscribing to our channel and turning on notifications. And let us know in the comments, what part of this history surprised you the most? Your engagement helps us continue to challenge simple narratives and bring these hidden histories to light. So, we come full circle. The 8,000-year-old lie isn't a single falsehood, but a tapestry of them, woven together over centuries. It's the lie of impossible ancient trade, a sensational myth of cocaine mummies that distracted from the real history. It's the lie of the miracle drug, a promise of safe euphoria whispered by doctors and pharmaceutical companies, a promise that left a trail of addiction in its wake. And finally, it's the biggest lie of all, the conflation of the sacred coca leaf, a cultural cornerstone for Andean civilizations, with the hyper-concentrated chemical it was twisted into by modern science. The story of cocaine is not the story of a plant. It's the story of what we did to that plant. It's a story of extraction, concentration, and commercialization. A story of medical hubris and, ultimately, criminalization fueled by fear and prejudice. We've been taught to fear the leaf when the real danger was born in a laboratory. We've been told a simple story about a dangerous drug, when the truth is a far more complex and troubling story about us. By untangling this lie, we don't just learn the true history of cocaine. We learn a cautionary tale about how easily truth can be refined, repurposed, and sold as something else entirely. If you made it to the end of this story, you already know why it matters. Share it with someone who doesn't. History this important shouldn't stay buried in an algorithm. And if you want more stories like this, the ones that are too heavy to forget and too important to ignore, subscribe. We'll be here every week, telling the ones that need to be told.